Welcome to the Faith and Culture Now podcast. I'm Scott Shiffer, and today I'm joined by Jillian, Randall, and Angela. As always, it's great to have you guys on the podcast, and today we're going to be talking about AI. Love it or hate it, it's here to stay, and it is causing all kinds of frustration, but it's also providing all kinds of goods and services throughout our culture in various markets. So when I say AI, Jillian, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
ChatGPT.
Said wisely like a teacher.
Yeah,
Very good. Go ahead. How about you, Randall? What comes to your mind first?
a Terminator. But we are going to say some positive things about it too, I'm sure.
That's right.
No, but to me, it's been a big kind of a sci-fi moment. You know, we've been talking about this for so long, and suddenly we're at the point where it's a reality, and just trying to figure out what it's going to mean. I think everybody kind of has the same questions. There's a lot of anticipation and a lot of trepidation, I think.
Absolutely.
I don't think any of us, when we were back in the day, as in the day when Terminator was coming out, nobody had any idea of what internet and social media would be. So it's a whole different landscape than anybody had predicted. So I think there's a lot of we can see a lot of benefits, but also a lot of concerns.
Absolutely. Angela, what do you think of when you first think AI?
I think Will Smith and iRobot. So we have the robots that help and then the robots that might be a little too friendly with us.
Right. So, well, very good. Well, I decided to do a little AI search to prepare for this podcast. And I was curious as to what things AI is used for most in our culture. And so, search engines and voice assistant stuff like Siri, Alexa, those are the things that tend to get the most use. But people also use AI for photos and video editing and manipulation, especially in social media. But we also see, things like chat bots with customer service that are AI, which I'm sure if you guys are anything like me, those drive you nuts. I would rather just talk to a real person. But we also find things like, in healthcare, having patient risk prediction and monitoring that actually is improved. And then for those of us that have to drive around the Metroplex all the time or other large cities, car navigations are used by, they're run by AI, and they help us get places quicker and more efficiently. And I know every time the navigation tells me, take this turn, and I go, I know better than you, it always ends up not working out the way that I had intended. So there's a lot of things that AI is used for. And there's also a lot of things AI is used for in the church. And sometimes that's a good thing. If you're used to working on your sermon and then putting your sermon in a PowerPoint, sometimes it might take, an extra 2 to 3 hours to get that PowerPoint the way you want it to look. If you're using Microsoft Copilot, you can make that PowerPoint in about 10 minutes and then spend maybe 15 or 20 minutes editing it just from your own sermon notes. And it actually saves you a significant amount of time. But there was a story a while back of a pastor who had done something. I think he said something that was somewhat offensive from the pulpit one Sunday. I would calculate that up to him, not being very careful with his words and thinking before he spoke. But he needed to apologize. And so the next Sunday, he preached a sermon where he apologized for what he had said the previous week. The problem is he used AI to help him develop his apology. And it sounded so similar to another pastor's apology that people found the two videos and combined them and put them on social media together. And then the guy got fired. And he didn't even do anything that he needed to apologize for that would have deserved being fired. But they thought this is ungenuine. The guy didn't even write his own apology, and he's just pulling from other pastors. What else is he doing that we're not seeing? What else is he doing we don't know about? And it had some very significant consequences. From a teacher perspective, Jillian, you mentioned ChatGPT. I frequently have my students do assignments that require them to use either ChatGPT or some other search engine like that. and I have them create some kind of a prompt in the search engine. It pulls up the data, and then their job as a student, what they get graded on, is in evaluating what ChatGPT provides them to see if it's accurate or not. So one example is when I teach biblical interpretation, I have the students do an Old Testament Bible study where they have ChatGPT write the Bible study for them, and then they have to critique what ChatGPT pulled from, what resources it used, and to determine, is it just putting out what is widely accessible on the internet, or is it putting out the best, most accurate information? And my goal is to help them realize you can't just rely on this technology to keep you from having to do the actual work yourself, and to it doesn't prevent you from having to do your own critical thinking. So, Randall, what are some of your concerns from a pastoral perspective of what AI is doing in our country, in our culture, but even in our churches?
I think the fear for a lot of people is that this is going to represent a shift, something like the Industrial Revolution, because there was a point in human history where we all worked manual labor jobs because there was so much manual labor that needed to be done. We had to do it. And the vast majority of work was physical work.
Mm-hmm.
When we developed machines and factories and the capability of producing things a lot more quickly and a lot more efficiently, we started devoting ourselves to other things like the humanities, research, all kinds of stuff. And so I think AI might represent that kind of a shift. So people who are in the technical fields, which tend to be the higher income, more stable, good career jobs, are probably shaking in their boots, because if you're looking into doing an analyst, a business analyst, or AI is the way they talk about it. It's likely going to do that better than we can before much
Mm-hmm.
longer. And so then what do we do now? I think it's going to represent a huge shift, and hopefully, if we can navigate it right, what it'll do is free us up to pursue what the kinds of potentials that only humans can pursue. I think in our current age, we value intellect and kind of the hard sciences are kind of at the top of the list right now. Perhaps this will shift us to a different perspective where we put other things that right now we don't value as much. And we've kind of already done this. Like, nobody is impressed that you can calculate mathematically very complicated things. We all know what a calculator is,
Right.
but take it a little further and bring it to the realm of analysis of data and collating information and doing the kinds of things we typically do. If machines can do, but I also think there's great potential.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of, people that are like coders today who are writing, in different various code language. And I had to do something a while back and I needed to put some JavaScript together. And I don't write JavaScript. I can mess my way around through it a little bit, but I don't write it. I had an AI tool create the JavaScript for me. And then I just went in, I had to tweak like three things and then it worked. But if I had written it myself, it would have taken me probably 6 hours just to write that. And I've heard some people say AI isn't going to necessarily replace that many jobs, but people who can use AI will be more valuable than people who can't, and will have more job security, not because the AI is replacing them, but because they know how to use it to do their jobs more efficiently and to add, like you were mentioning, Randall, that human element to discerning and critiquing what the AI comes up with. Jillian, what are some of your thoughts?
I mean, I really love your assignment that you gave your students. My eighth grade son had his English teacher gave them something similar at the very beginning of the year, which I thought was pretty brilliant to demonstrate early in the year the advantages, but also the pitfalls of using it and that it still has limits. I mean, yes, they are large language models, but there are lots of topics out there that have bad information on the
Mm-hmm.
internet. And so it's cool that it can aggregate it, but I think my concern for young people overusing it is that they don't have the critical thinking in place yet. And
Yeah.
so giving them tasks like that, where it's making them, evaluate the information, I think is really important for really all educators at this point to be doing, because they are going to use it. It's extremely accessible. I teach music appreciation one class period a day, and it's something new for me this year. So I'm always looking for things for them to do. Gave them an assignment where we were doing genres, and they needed to write a 3-paragraph story that could be turned into a country song. And I was just wowed by these responses, wowed by them. And my husband said, they used ChatGPT to write all that, right? I thought, it's so naive. I was like, no, not this kid. And I went the next day and I said, nobody's in trouble. I didn't tell you not to use it, but raise your hand if you used that. 100% of them used it. And so, some of those songs, I thought, gosh, we could put this in Suno, and which is also an AI platform that makes music, drop some beats with it, and there you go. But again, for the younger generations that have not yet been forced to do things the old hard way, and evaluate information, that's my bigger concern for young people, is that there's so much information these days. And one of my great teachers always used to say that information is not knowledge and knowledge is not wisdom.
Mhm.
And
That's right.
spiritually, that's true also when it comes to accessing information about the Bible. I mean, I love what you did with your students, because I teach a little Bible study on Friday mornings and try and teach the kids about resources that I think are high value, that yes, it's search engine type things, but I trust these resources that
Mhm.
give more resources. So I think it's always a good idea to teach kids to look for resources that list more resources, because then it's giving them, all of a broader range of places to pull from, that's not just chat and not just the regular search engines they go to. So I think it's a pretty steep mountain we have to climb at this point in I teach junior high. And so we're just on kind of the cutting edge of them having access to all of that. And teachers are really going to have to keep up with it to be able to continue to educate kids in critical thinking, or else but I do think you made the point about the calculator, Randall, and that's a really good point, because I'm sure when the calculator was invented, mathematicians were just disgusted. I'm sure they were disgusted at all these cheaters using this tool. And so, I try not to be just an old person saying, "Oh, we're just cheating," try and engage with it, but at the same time, try and encourage any sort of creativity of their own accord. So yes, sure, go put your song in Suno, but then I'm also trying to teach them Western notation so that they can also learn to write a song just the old fashioned way. And, I hope that at least it's going to catch a few kids, maybe fewer than it did before in the creative arts, because of the ease of using all the platforms. But I do think we're going to start to see a big disparity in AI created content and not AI created content, and the
Okay.
humanity soul aspect of the category that's not created with AI. I think eventually we will see big difference between those two buckets of creative content that come out.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I'm a big fan of Comic Cons. And a lot of times now they will say, if you're looking at vendor applications, they'll say no art that is created through AI is allowed from an artist at an art booth. It all has to be your own genuine art. And I always kind of find that interesting. And this is where in the podcast I make all the KJV only people upset. But you're talking about, the plethora of information out there, right? When the King James translators did the original King James translation, they were using primarily documents from the 1100s and the twins from Greek and Hebrew. And there's a ton of those documents. But now we have older, more reliable documents that
Mhm.
date hundreds of years before the documents that the King James translators had access to. And so a lot of other translations today, the New American Standard, the NIV, whatever, right? They use a lot of these older, more reliable manuscripts. And as such, there are some differences between the KJV and the other translations of the Bible. And the KJV guys that translated it did an absolutely phenomenal job. It's a really well done translation for 1611, and they made the best use they could out of the tools they had at the time. But today we have so many more manuscripts, so many more tools at our disposal, and we have uses of language in the scripture from extra biblical use, in a lot more prevalence in other documents that have been discovered. So we know how words are used and how, what they mean better than we did 400 years ago. And
Mhm.
so again, it goes back to that whole idea of critical thinking. You could use the King James, and some people still use it today, and that's fine, but it's not the most reliable translation anymore. Not because the guys that did it were being poor stewards of their, abilities and what they had access to, but rather because we have a wider range of knowledge now and we can make better choices in newer translations. And so, to your point, recognizing the importance of critical thinking and not just going, oh, yeah, this Bible verse reads this way in 5,000 manuscripts and only reads this way in 300, but not thinking, well, those 300 manuscripts are 500 years older than the other manuscripts, making them more reliable. That kind of stuff is important. And that's where the human element really comes into play with a lot of this AI stuff. Angela, what are some of your initial thoughts on AI usage in society and in the church?
Well, going back to the iRobot piece of it, I think we live in an incredible environment that I believe God put us in, where He's given us so many more tools. We have tools that our grandparents never even dreamed of, and tools that their grandparents never dreamed of. And to your point with KJV, tools that you know those translators didn't even have. So I think it's what tools is God giving us and how do we use those tools responsibly? For the calculator metaphor Randall, I apologize. Randall brought up, I think it's interesting because in order to work a calculator, at least somewhat correctly, you have to know the basic functions of it. And so to use AI, the way it's designed, you ought to learn how to use it somewhat effectively. I work in the business world, and my client was trying to build a bot to do some manual calculations of data, not numerical calculations, just manual input. And everybody was excited, and it was supposed to save all of us time. And there were so many trials through it. And then finally, we launched it. And soon after, we found out that not only did it time out, it also didn't correlate the data accurately. So then our human team had to go back through and correct what the bot had done. Does that mean that we should never use AI again? No. Does that mean that the coders were horrible people and should be fired? No. It just means that there's a human element involved. And the more you in the business world, the more you're able to understand how to utilize AI, yes, that's going to set you ahead, just in the same way as learning how to use Microsoft Word or Teams or Google Docs sets you ahead in competition. You've got to know you've got to know the tools for the trade that you're in. And then from a faith perspective, and the different translations are great. It's really neat to do a deep dive in a Bible study. And as Jillian pointed out, she uses a specific word search. And that doesn't mean she just pulls up Google and says, "What's faith in Spanish?" and compare that to German. And wow, that's cool. That's the same root word. It's not that. It's she's going and looking at different sources, and that really makes the scriptures come alive because our language today is so much different than what we talked in 1611 or that we even talked in the 500s or that we talked before Jesus was born. So I feel like AI can be positioned to be used well, but we've seen with social media in the last 10 years or so how destructive it can be. So the more that we're able to teach students and teach younger kids, our kids, middle school, high school, how to use AI with responsibility, just like how we use social media or should be using it responsibly, I think that's going to impact the church. And because you don't just go around to somebody and say, well, Revelation 21:8 says liars go to hell, so you're going to hell. Like,
Right, right.
it's not only for hermeneutics, but you're also not building bridges. And Jesus also didn't say you have the right to send people to hell. You know, it's how are you using the knowledge that you're given in a wise way, which I think also speaks back to what Jillian and Randall were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about AI as it impacts and affects the church. I think of people who use it to write their sermons. That's a bad idea. But getting AI to help you cultivate some illustrations or things like that
Mhm.
may be beneficial. And for one, I mean, you could say, AI, tell me the 5 main views on this particular passage. That's great. It may give you a good, understanding of those 5 views, but you still have to determine, well, which one is correct? Which one am I going to teach?
Mhm.
And with regard to social media, AI can help pull clips from your sermon so that it allows you to post those online to
Mhm.
give your congregation members little clips from the sermon throughout the week that hopefully will be pieces of spiritual encouragement. And that's
Mhm.
great. But if you start using those clips to try to gain an audience following where it becomes more about the engagement than it does the
Yes,
discipleship, that's a problem, and your priorities are out of
absolutely.
order. With regard to AI and culture and society at the whole, as a whole, one of the things that concerns me is the amount of things you can do with AI
Mhm.
that allow you to manipulate true things into false things. And so, I have a friend that the other day he showed me a video, and in the video, so he had a picture of his son at the kitchen table holding a balloon, and he used AI, and AI took that picture and then had the son fly out of the table, and up to the ceiling holding the balloon. Well, clearly that didn't really happen, right? But more and more and more you see AI videos on social media, and sometimes they're just to be funny, right? Like the thing my friend did, that's just to be funny. But sometimes people use social media to try to malign others by creating fake
Mhm.
videos that make it look
Yes.
like they have said or done something that they haven't done to damage their reputation. And I can see how that could be used in the church. I can see how that could be used in schools. I can see how it could be used for any businesses or for any drama that happens, in a town, right? And so I think we have to be really careful because there are, I think, the laws and other things that need to be put into place to regulate this. The problem is the technology is moving faster
Mhm.
than the laws. And so we end up with a lot of gray area where things can be done that might not should be done. And as Christians, I think we have a responsibility to look at our society and go, how do we, as a light for the gospel, as a light for the kingdom, how do we speak into these situations in our culture to help guide people into making responsible decisions, or maybe to be able to look at a situation and go, okay, do you really think that's what actually happened? Or how do we help people step back and not be duped by the false technology? So, what are you guys' thoughts on some of that kind of stuff? Anybody have anything?
This part is near and dear to my heart. One of the big things that's come out in the mental health sphere is using chatbots and things like that. I know we touched on it with medical offices, but with the mental health piece of it, and therapists and counselors struggle with it because people tend to form an unnatural attachment. And we see that played out, with addictions. And so now with social media, we're now addicted to our devices. So now there's a literal chemical that's released from your brain, the dopamine effect of I've grabbed my phone, I've looked, or I didn't get the likes, I didn't this. And so now we're just addicted to this thing. With AI, well, what's wrong with me? And so AI will pull whatever resources it has. And this is where the iRobot too familiar, too friendly gets of, oh, this is part of self-harm and this is this. And so now this person has gone a step further than Google self um diagnosing, to the point of now they just know based on everything that AI chat GPT gave them that they are just have this litany of diagnoses. So then when they go into a doctor's office or a psychiatrist or a therapist's office, here's all their information. When really it could be just as simple as you are way too distracted by being on your device. You need to sleep, you need to eat, you need to get some outside sexual physical sun. You need to do some gentle exercise. All of those basic things. There's nothing wrong with digging for information. It's what are you using and how are you using that information, which I think we also see with Eve and Adam in the garden with the snake. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's, ooh, is God keeping something from us? Well, maybe we're not quite ready for all that AI can do. If we as Christians are sitting behind a keyboard and blasting somebody or blasting a sermon clip that we heard, or Angela just said liars go to hell. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Yeah. So from a mental health perspective, this really hits deep. Last story, and then I'll hand it over, I promise. I have a brother who purposely messes with his chat GPT. And so he's purposely not given it any type of, well, this is how I talk, this is my slang, this is my accent, this is my nothing, because he wants to see how AI is going to continue to shift to try to befriend him. And all of that is just so artificial. Just like when you fall in love with somebody online and it's catfish or it's, a scam or something like that. So we really need to do a better job of being mature about how we handle social media and AI.
Absolutely. The algorithm is AI as well, and it tends to give you more of what you like. And that's something that's caused a lot of the political divide in our country
Mm,
because people that are inclined to like something, it just shows them more and more of that. And then they
yeah.
start sort of polarizing. And that wasn't the intent of the social media. That wasn't the intent of the algorithm. It's just sort of one of those unintended consequences. So,
Hmm.
Randall, you were going to say something, I believe. Randall, I cannot hear you. I'm wondering if your mic got turned off.
Is it on now?
Now
Yes.
we can hear you again.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry. I was trying to say one of the things that one of the weaknesses about AI that I think we often don't consider is that an AI will never admit that it doesn't know. It's just the way it's designed to provide an answer, and it will collate an answer from whatever it has. And if it doesn't have the answer, it will make one up.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times we don't recognize that, but it's a phenomenon. I think we're probably all here old enough to remember a time when you were walking around and you said you were talking to somebody and said, "Who was the actor in whatever movie?" And you would say, "Well, for the life of me, I can't remember." And we were okay with that.
Hmm.
Maybe it'll come to you. Maybe you'll see it on a poster somewhere. Maybe but we were fine saying, I don't know. But we've gotten accustomed to not being able to say, I don't know anything. I mean, the
Hmm.
minute we don't know something, we pull out our phone and find it.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
And AI is kind of that on steroids in that it will give you an answer. Now, my wife at her job, they're doing studies with AI type technology, and she's in a power marketing company, and she's a vice president and has people under her. And she had one of her employees that had turned in kind of a report on something, and there was an explanation of how they had arrived at a calculation that was completely wrong. I mean, it was actually the opposite of the actual way it worked. So she asked her about this and came to find out that that was generated by AI. But she had been doing her work, and then the AI asked if it could help her, provide more explanation, and she said sure. So the AI provided more explanation, but it did so by making something up that wasn't true, and she would have been better off not involving it at all.
Mhm.
So I think those are some areas you talk about learning to use the technology so that it's beneficial. I think that's the real learning curve is trying to figure out what can it do, what can't it do.
Mhm.
I've used it, and I can say three quick things that I've used it in my ministry that have been very helpful.
Was it
We have
apologies?
recently do what?
Was it apologies?
No, no.
Excuse.
No, I do not ask for a computer to write my apologies for. But we recently have moved to we have a building that's paid for, but, it's larger than we need, and we're transitioning into partnering with other congregations to share the building space and, multi-ethnic. kind of that's what we're trying to do. So I wrote up a kind of a basic doctrinal statement that is a lot more stripped down than, like, the Baptist faith and message or anything like that. A much more bare bones kind of doctrinal statement. And then somebody asked me, well, are you going to put scripture references? And it would have taken me a long time to go through and track down all of the scripture references that I would bring in. So I used AI to help me with that. I gave it the statement and I said, what are scriptures that would support this statement? And then I evaluated the scriptures suggested and picked the ones that I felt best illustrated the point, the theological point I was trying to make. It saved me a lot of time, and it allowed me to collate some scriptures in a very efficient way. We're a multilingual congregation. Every so often we have multilingual services, and we have recently started using AI automatic translation.
Mhm.
And that is something I'm very excited about. I think that's going to really open up things for the church, the multilingual church, the multicultural church, and I believe we're entering uh, the era the church was always meant to enter into. This idea of the reconciliation of the whole human family. I think AI will play a significant role in that. So I've certainly seen AI used in very positive ways, but we have to realize what are the things it can't do or shouldn't do. I have no interest in asking AI to write a sermon for me, but I do all my sermon preparation. I write out my commentary on the text that I basis for my sermon, and then I my commentary on the text into AI and ask it to generate discussion questions, which I then read through and edit before I send them off to the congregation. But that saves me a lot of time. And AI is really good at when you give it something, tell it, summarize this for me, or pull out the key points, or, it's really good
Mhm.
at that kind of thing. And it's very useful. It can really save time and help you put things out quickly.
Right, and the better you get at using the tool, the better it does that, right? So if I have a lecture and I want to create a 10 question quiz on that lecture, I can put it into AI and say, give me 10 multiple choice questions. But if I say, give me 10 multiple choice questions for people who are sophomores in college and give me an answer key and, all these other things, it'll give me better questions than if I just say, give me 10 questions. If I want to cater something towards a sixth grade audience versus a 12th grade audience, knowing how to use the AI allows you to make that work better. I know a couple of pastors like you, Randall, that they put their sermons into the AI and then they have it generate an outline where people can fill in the blanks that they put in the bulletin for the church to use, and it saves them an hour or two of putting that together. But they also, of course, go through and they read it and make sure it's the way they want it to be, and don't just assume it did a perfect job.
Yes,
So
always check it.
yes. Yeah, even like when I've used it for, little quizzes and stuff, I'll notice that sometimes it'll put really good answer choices down, but sometimes the answer choices it puts are so close to the real thing that several could be right. And then I have to go, I'm going to go change these a little bit so that I'm not, giving my students, conniptions because they think, is it this one or this one? And, and then they have a meltdown in class. So, Jillian, what are some of your thoughts?
Yes, I think the point made about using it more as like an editor and something to create additional tools is how that's how I like to use it as well. I mean, if you're familiar with teaching and the standards that you are supposed to always list on your lesson plans and things like that, should I have those memorized? Probably. Do I? No. So I'll put the lesson plan in and say, spit out the teaks for me so I can put those on there. So time saving endeavors like that or making outlines or making test questions, things like that. I do think it's really useful for. I think it's really useful for, we've already kind of said this, but maybe just jogging some creativity going, giving you some ideas of things to think about. But we had our Christmas concert, and I always write the script for students to read, whatever, in between songs and things. And so it was funny because they said, oh, Chat GPT write that. And it honestly doesn't even occur to me. I guess I'm that old right now that it doesn't occur to me to have the thing write something for me. A, because I'm pretty sure I wouldn't like it. And B, it won't sound anything like, well, let me say this. Even if, I'm not always 100% happy with whatever I've written, I feel no pride if I've asked ChatGPT. There is a fulfillment that
Mhm.
one gets when you have created the thing.
Yes.
And I'm sure it's the same in writing a sermon or anything else, in that if you didn't do it, you're not attached to it. I
Right.
can't imagine preaching a sermon that ChatGPT wrote that didn't come out of your soul. So it's the same thing, as I've been saying with writing music or anything else like that. There's a disconnect there if you didn't create the content. I think using it to evaluate content, using it to outline, summarize, all those things we've just said, those are all really great tools. And there's millions of uses of AI that I don't even know. The kids know, but like I said, it wouldn't even occur to me to use it that way. So, I mean, definitely there are lots of things that make everybody's life easier with using it. But at the same time, um, yeah, my concern, I guess, as somebody who is a creative person, is people just taking the shortcut. And
Yeah.
then secondarily, the biggest concern I have is, as we've said earlier, the manipulation. I
Mhm.
think one of the creepiest things I saw this last year was the talking with the deceased.
Hmm.
That whole AI platform completely creeped me out when I saw examples of that. And just that, I understand why someone would want to do that. I understand that. But it felt so disrespectful to me, to the person who's passed away, that you're making an assumption about what they would even say about anything. So that kind of a thing is really, it's really terrifying, honestly, that we would manipulate people's emotional well-being and things like that in such a way like that. And that's a really, I mean, honestly, the people doing that probably have some sort of well-meaning bent in them to try and help someone. But then you think about all of the not well-meaning people in the world who we are giving access to all these kind of manipulation tools, and that's concerning. That's really
Mhm.
concerning. And that's there again, it's why I think we have to stay educated. And I think especially like our age and older, it's going to be harder on us
Mhm.
to remain educated on all of these things, but we really have to, so that, we don't get scammed and we don't get manipulated, and we're able to discern wisely who we are following and the authorities in our life. And it's just interesting to think about all of the ways that people are using it to manipulate other people. And I'm already
Yeah.
trying to teach my kids about all of that, that you really just need to go ahead and probably not trust anything that you're seeing. Is that even real? Like you were saying with the kid in the balloon. I mean, that to me, that feels new. That feels new-ish, to not be able to trust what I'm seeing with my eyes
Mhm.
as being
Hmm.
something. Obviously, a kid floating away in a balloon, right? That's not real. But there are lots of things that look very real,
Mhm.
scary
Yeah.
real, and they're not real. So
Yeah.
and I think, again, one of the best tactics for that is to you yourself do that. Like, you make your picture. It's all this thing with all making the pictures right now with all these different prompts. And it just shows you how easy it is. I mean, it makes me want to get off social media entirely and not post any
Mhm.
pictures of anyone in my family ever again. But, I don't know. I'm sure there's going to be some sort of moderation, as there is with social media, that comes through. But I agree with Randall that I think this is going to be a shift of the magnitude of the Industrial Revolution. And
Hmm.
so we are in that weird age group of, we remember the life before it, our kids won't.
Hmm.
And it's going to kind of land on us to make sure any semblance of the goodness of before times
Right.
carries on,
Mhm.
while also staying relevant with all of it that's happening.
Yeah.
My
Absolutely.
grandmother remembered a time when people didn't have refrigerators in their house or microwaves. Most of us don't have that luxury unless you live somewhere that
Mhm.
just didn't have access to those things, right? But they existed. And even if you didn't have them, you knew of them.
Mhm.
We will remember the time when you didn't go to Google, you didn't ask Jeeves or whatever.
That's
Uh, you know, the people, my kids, that's just like not a concept for them. And to your point, Jillian, I think that when you write something yourself, when you create something yourself, there's a sense of accomplishment. And when you don't do it yourself, there isn't a sense of accomplishment because you haven't really accomplished anything. But to Randall's point with regard to writing sermons and things like that, ChatGPT isn't in a relationship with the Holy Spirit who's convicting you of what message you need to give to your congregation. And ChatGPT, or any other AI for that matter, is not in a covenant relationship with God and listening to the Holy Spirit's conviction on what needs to be addressed.
Yes.
Just about any Bible verse you look at has a meaning or a range of meanings, but it has a lot more than just one application. And ChatGPT may say, from all the information we have, this is the normal application, but that may not be the most important application in your situation, in your setting. And so I think we need to be very careful there. And as far as the bad actors go, it's interesting to me that at this point, there are people using AI to fight against, so good people using AI to fight against bad people using AI that are trying to do nefarious things. But that requires creating AI that does bad things in a enclosed environment, right? So that you can figure out what the other people are using it for so that you can figure out how to overcome that. And, just like with anything in history, it can be used for good or it can be used for evil. And I think as Christians, we have no need to be afraid of AI. What we do need to be is aware and awake. We need to be able to recognize how AI is affecting social media, how it's affecting education, how it's affecting our various vocations and the people in the church and, how it affects their jobs. We also need to be aware of how it affects spirituality. And we need to be aware of, I think, to some level, how people in our churches are using it to even deal with their own relationship with God. There are probably people going, "Hey Siri, I'm thinking about this spiritually. What should I do?" And it gives them it gives them an answer. And to Randall's point earlier, sometimes it makes up that answer. And we don't really need the AI tools acting like priests or acting like spiritual advisors, but we need to be aware of what people that we know who are believers, especially if we're in a leadership position with them, what kind of things they're using AI for that, so that we can better help guide them to at least, maybe responsible use, but also to help them critically think about when it is and is not appropriate to trust the algorithm or the bot on the other side of the screen for those kinds of things. And as Christians, I don't think so. As Christians in general, one of our, what I would call bad habits is that as things change in society, we kind of sit back. And then once we realize, okay, this is not a fad, we have a lot of catching up to do.
Right.
And we're always behind the times. And the problem with that is that we are supposed to be the stewards of God's world. And if we're not actively involved in the things that are happening in God's world, then we're not stewarding it very well. And so I think Christians need to step up and go, how can we be on the forefront of this? How can we take what's happening and use it for kingdom purposes? And how can we use it in a way that is redemptive? How can we, not just redemptive in a salvific way, but redemptive with jobs, redemptive with education, or whatever else? There's nothing wrong with being on the forefront of what's happening as Christians. And oftentimes we just sort of sit back, and instead of being leaders as stewards in God's world, we become followers. And then by the time we're ready to get on board, it's all we can do just to keep up. And I think that's something we really as Christians need to really wrestle with and think through as we see more and more and more technological advancement, especially with regard to AI. So, Angela, what final questions or concerns do you have about AI as it relates to society and ministry and whatnot?
I think it's important for people, whether they follow Christ or not, to realize that AI is artificial. Just like social media, you always see the good, the best versions of other people. You're seeing when I'm having a really great day, or you're seeing a montage of videos of really bad clips of your enemy. It's not real. And so we need to stop treating it like it is real.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it's important that we also recognize that it is a useful tool. It's neither positive nor negative. It's the meaning that we give to it. So the more we use it in a positive way, the more we can use it to enhance ourselves. Again, in a useful, positive way, not in, I sound like a guru. I just mean it in the sense of the more you're using the tool responsibly, the more positive outcomes you're going to have in your job, in your day to day life, and things like that. But it should never, ever, ever take the place of actual human contact. COVID was such a great reminder of how important relationships are to us and to just human beings. And to supplant that with AI is very dangerous. So embrace the connection with human people, and use the tool to help you connect. Um, so, hey, AI chat GPT, help me write a funny meme to send to Jillian. She just had a really rough week at school. And then there's some silly musical thing versus I just never mind. Y'all
Yeah.
can edit that part out. But
Yeah. All
use it
good.
responsibly. Use it responsibly and don't let it take the place of an actual human connection.
Yeah. Randall, what are some final thoughts on your end?
I hope we can really use this technology and learn to engage it in a much more positive way than I think we've come into it. It's unfortunate that we came into AI on the tail end of kind of the dark aftermath of social media,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
which led to isolation, led to kind of this virtual experience of human interaction. So then to move from that to interacting with a bot feels to people like the same thing because they've already lost the human connection. And I'm hoping we can regain that AI will free us up the way the industrial revolution freed us up, that it will free us up to be more fully human, that we will be more able to do the spiritually profoundly significant things that only humans can do.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we made a mistake in confusing intellect with that.
Hmm.
If a computer can do the intellect thing better than us, that good. That's not the main thing that makes us what we are. We can relate to God, and we can be bearers of the image of God together, and we can be a part of this together. And maybe this can free us up to really engage that more deeply because it'll remove other distractions that we don't have to carry anymore. My hope is that that's what AI will do for us. And that's what I'm praying for.
Absolutely. Jillian, any final thoughts on your end?
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things I think you said, Randall, was the translation techniques that can help with the church and things like that. I think you're right. Like that's probably something that's helping usher in the global church in a different way than it's ever been able to. And you're right. There's so many positive applications that can be used. And I think you're right that people are just a little leery about all of this coming out of the last 10 years or so. But I also the cool thing about I'm always relating back to students and kids because that's who I'm around 95% of the time. I do see them though, the pendulum swinging a little bit. I was thinking the other day, sourdough's made a big comeback. I myself dabble in the sourdough. And it's funny that these kind of, you're talking about back in the day before refrigerators, like there are activities coming back from
Yeah.
long ago that people are finding joy and interest in. And so I actually have probably the greatest hope for our young people right now that because this has been the norm, that they kind of want more of a balance
Hmm.
of because they get
Mm-hmm.
it, it's not something like for our generation and older where it's been something we've had to keep up with. We've had to learn on the job. We've had to, it's almost like we're just scrambling all the time to keep up with all of this stuff. And they're not. It's just the air they breathe. And so because of that, I don't get this sense of frantic, neither really obsession. I don't see kids being obsessed with it the way I see adults being obsessed with it. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you have that same experience, but I've noticed a lot of kids that have way better boundaries around their cell phones than adults do. And it's because it's not novel to them. It's just part of their life. the way I don't know that, I haven't been addicted to my computer necessarily because I've had one since I was a small child. And so I do have hope, I think, that the young people could be bringing the balance that we need, but they still need the wisdom of our generation to remain connected to them, to remind them of all of the bad information that's out there and the need to evaluate. I think we are necessary, and I think it's going to get easier and easier to feel obsolete as the older people with all of these kids that can do all of these things. And I do believe that the wisdom we can bring to them is the capacity and the tools to evaluate, because that is, I think, what they lack, is the capacity to weigh and sift and discern because of the short attention spans and because of the overflood of information. So I think my hope always with the church is that we just continue to grow more multi-generational and help each other in both ways, and that we're not scared of the other one, and that we're not negative towards, that the young and the old can be open-minded to learn from each other and share the strengths that we all have, because I think that's what the church probably should look like.
Amen.
Absolutely. I heard you saying bring balance to the force, which is not exactly what you said, but um,
You were
but
supposed to.
but
We'll have to
to
do a
your
May the
point,
4th
yeah,
podcast, and we can talk
that's
about
right.
that.
But to your point, mentorship is a very important aspect of community, and community is a very important aspect of being part of the church and part of God's kingdom. And we do need older people pouring into younger people about the most important things. And it's not whether you're a Calvinist or not, it's about how to live out your faith in a way that allows you to make wise choices. And as the younger people get older, they'll need to pour into the next generation that comes behind them. And so we all need someone mentoring us. We need to be doing mentoring. Like the rest of you guys, I want my kids to be better humans, better people, better believers than I am. And I mean that, I mean, in a way, I want them to be more well-rounded individuals. I want them to be able to, where I've struggled, I want them to be able to have more clarity. Where I have fumbled through things, I want them to go, oh, well, based on my dad's mistakes, I can do this more easily now. But I think with regard to the technology, I think you're absolutely right, Jillian. A lot of younger people don't see the technology as novel as we do. I mean, my youngest child knows no time when you couldn't just look up a video on streaming or whatever. There's things that they just take for granted that weren't even conceptualized, back in the 1990s. And so, with regard to that, hopefully, where we've been maybe a little bit unbalanced in how we've had to catch up with the technology, they'll be a little bit more balanced. And then as they move into parenthood and, have kids and stuff, they can help their kids navigate things even better than we were able to help our kids. And so, all that being said, AI is not going away. AI is not a fad. It is here to stay. It's actually been around a lot longer than some people think, but it's just more prevalent and more diverse at this point. And so, as it becomes diverse, we do have to ask ourselves good questions, like, from Jurassic Park, he said, when Malcolm says, we didn't stop to think whether we should, we just thought we could. And with AI right now, there's a lot of that going on. It feels kind of like the Wild West in the technology world. And it feels that way because people are trying to figure out how to do all kinds of things faster than government control can say, hey, whoa, that's too much of an invasion of people's privacy or whatever else the case is. And sometimes people do things with only good intent, but those things always have unintended consequences. And whatever can be done with good intent can also be done with malintent. And so we just have to be wise. And Jesus talks in the New Testament about, people being shrewd. Now, he's obviously speaking in a different context, but as Christians, we really do need to be wise to the technology in the world around us. And we need to embrace the good. We need to promote the good, and we need to lead in a way that is virtuous, where we can say, look, this is great. We shouldn't be doing this over here. We don't need to have any part of this side of it. And that doesn't mean nobody's going to do it, but at least, with whatever the consequences are of that, we can feel like, hey, you know what? I made the right choice and, stood for the right things as various different new pieces of AI technology came available. Guys, thank y'all so much for being on the podcast today. For those of you watching or listening, we appreciate it. And we will see you again next time on the Faith and Culture Now podcast.